scared, run! Is the coast clear? Okay, well then let's get started. Today we're going to be discussing the Immigration Act of 1924. What was the Immigration Act of 1924? Well, the Immigration Act of 1924 was a federal law that reduced the immigration from Southern and Eastern Europe. Well, why would you want to reduce the immigration from Southern and Eastern Europe? Especially when, in previous years, we'd had so many immigrants, especially from Italy. Well, if you remember from our last unit, we discussed the Bolshevik Revolution in Russia. The Bolshevik Revolution in Russia was when the communists rose up and took over the government. Now, during this time, a lot of communists were also coming to the United States. And can you guess where they were from? You got it. Southern and Eastern Europe. So how do we connect the Red Scare with the Immigration Act of 1924? One way to do this would be to consider the larger political context of the 1920s. Remember, we had just gotten out of World War I, and the United States was really not interested in making any alliances economically or militarily with any other countries. So we developed this idea of isolationism, where we would look at our own interests first. The United States wanted to isolate itself further than just from alliances militarily and economically. It also wanted to isolate itself from immigration. One way that the United States sought to do this was through nativism. Nativism is a policy through which the United States would favor the interests of U.S. citizens over those of foreign immigrants. Now that we understand the political context of the 1920s through the idea of isolationism and also through nativism, we can move on to understand how the Red Scare really affected the United States. The Red Scare affected the United States through the increase of immigration from Southern and Eastern Europe. This increase brought in this communist and anarchist ideology. So communism and anarchy were two of the main reasons why xenophobia increased in the United States in the 1920s. The United States really began to crack down on communist and anarchist ideology. And a couple of ways that they did this was through propaganda and also through increased police raids. And one famous story of this is the story of Sacco and Vanzetti, two Italian immigrants who were also anarchists. So Sacco and Vanzetti were sentenced to death following their conviction for armed robbery. It's suspected that they were actually sentenced to death for their anarchist beliefs, along with their labor strikes and their anti-war agitation, as well as their political propaganda. So Sacco and Vanzetti serves as an example of xenophobia the United States felt towards anarchists and communists. Is it possible that Sacco and Vanzetti were innocent of the crimes that they were sentenced to death for? Is it all possible that maybe they were just convicted because of their anarchist beliefs? This may be very well true, but what we need to keep in mind is that the Red Scare was a real fear in the United States. People were honestly afraid of immigrants from Southern and Eastern Europe because of the ideology that they were bringing into the United States. This is what led to the passing of the Immigration Act of 1924. Now what I'd like to do is, using the game of Risk, I would like to show you a visual demonstration of what the Immigration Act of 1924 would look like using M&Ms. Now I'm going to take you through a visual demonstration of what the Immigration Act of 1924 would actually look like if we were to use M&Ms to represent immigrants. In 1924, before the Immigration Act was actually signed, there was 59,490 immigrants from Great Britain. Each one of these M&Ms is going to represent 500 immigrants. So that would look similar to this right here. Between Italy and Eastern Europe, there was approximately 70,000 immigrants, which would look something like that right there. The next thing we're going to look at is what happened following the Immigration Act of 1924 and how that affected the immigration to the United States. The impact of the Immigration Act of 1924 is going to be more visible in 1925, when we'll notice the restrictions to Italian immigrants and other Eastern European immigrants. Now, don't be too shocked by the decreased number in Great Britain. Great Britain usually jumps from any number between about 25,000 to 60,000. So 1925 marks 27,000 for Great Britain. What's going to be shocking though is the 6,000 that we're going to see entering into Italy. There's also going to be only 1,500 into the rest of Southern Europe in this year. Now, 1926, there's small differences in Great Britain at only about 25,500, but there's an increase of about 2,000 from Italy in 1926. So already you can see a significant difference between the years of 1924 to 1925 and 1926. A huge decrease in the amount of immigration, which goes to show you that the immigration quotas restricted the amount of immigrants from Italy, Eastern Europe, Russia, and all through this region. If you remember, they also wanted to restrict immigration from Asia as well. The next thing we're going to see is 1929, where I'm going to show you what it would look like with all of the countries that were listed for immigration of that year. In 1929, we're going to notice a significant difference between 1924, 1925, 1926. By 1929, the total immigration is 164,667. Now, what you're seeing here is just Great Britain and Ireland alone. I can't even fit them all on Great Britain. What we're going to see now is the amount of immigration from Italy, which is 3,845.
That's all, folks.
Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and spread a couple of these out from different regions. There's 1,000 from Africa total, and all together throughout the rest of the world, there's going to be a total of about 21,000. You know, I think there's a couple from Australia. There's a couple from. We got a couple from Russia. About 2,000 or so. Now, what we're going to look at is the rest of the immigrants from Northern and Western Europe. And what you're going to see is that there's a significant difference between the immigrants from Northern and Western Europe and Southern and Eastern Europe. So, this is the effect of the Immigration Act of 1924.